Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? This is a short review of a short story. The story is called Next in Line and it is featured in Ray Bradbury's October Country collection. There will be some spoilers here, but I still think that you should read the story. I will warn you before the spoilers come so you can hear what the story is about. It centers on a young married couple. They're in their late 20s. Their name's Joe and Marie, and they are touring Mexico. While they are in a small town, they witness a funeral procession and later go on a tour of a burial site, sort of like a mausoleum, but they bury people not alive, but they bury them, obviously. They bury them without embalming because of the heat. And the corpses mummify, but Marie wonders why the mummies are then dug up. The keeper explains that people pay rent for burial sites, 20 pesos a year, I think she said, or I think he said, something like that. But if they want to do a permanent burial, it's more like 170 pesos, which is equivalent to about 2 years' earnings for the locals. Obviously, people will have more pressing needs. They'll have homes that need repair. They'll have cars that break down. They will have mouths to feed. And they've got to choose between the living and the dead. And some people can't pay the fee, so the keepers pull the mummies out until the fee is paid. This scene is so horrific and macabre that Marie becomes very fixated on the horror of it all and decides that she no longer wants to stay in the town. Joe protests. They just got there. They haven't seen everything that they wanted to see yet, but they can't come to an accord on it, and so Joe ultimately gives in to the needs of his wife. She's very thrilled. She packs everything up. They go to leave. Their car is broken. A part is busted. It's going to take 2 or 3 days for it to get there. They've got to stay in this town. While they are there, Marie becomes more and more scared about the notion of ending up like one of these mummies. She starts to get sick. She eventually makes Joe promise. She says, hey, like, whatever happens, don't let me end up in that, I'm going to say mausoleum, even though it isn't technically one. Don't let me end up with those mummies. He doesn't ever actually commit to it. He thinks that she's just being dramatic, but finally he calls out to her and he doesn't get a response. This is not the end of the story, not right away, so here's the spoiler if you want to tune out. But the story ends with a jump cut to a day or two later, and he's continuing to drive around in Mexico, leaving the jungle area and heading elsewhere. And he's got a black band tied around his arm. This is something that's fallen out of practice in America. It was more of like an early to mid 20th century thing, but I don't really know of anybody who does it now. But that's a symbol of mourning. And he thinks of something, and he goes to reach over and rest a hand on his wife's leg while he's driving, and she's not there. And he has a sad remembrance of what happened. The end. I think this is a different kind of horror, a different kind of fear story than what you might see in a film these days, where everything's about slashers and monsters and demonic possessions and the jump scares and the visual horrifying elements. I think Ray Bradbury was more effective with the psychological and spiritual fears, and he was able to implement that better with the written word than you maybe could with visuals. But ultimately, my takeaway is that this is a story about what you fixate on, faith over fear. In the same way that people of religious persuasions can focus on the objects of their faith and find inspiration and find fortification in those things, people who too heavily focus on their fears can succumb to them. I think there's maybe more than just a psychosomatic relationship between these things. Just as what you are, how you are, what you feed yourself physically, you are also what you feed yourself mentally and spiritually. And this is made manifest in Marie's hyperfixation on the horrific sight of these mummies in this Mexican grave. She was so terrified of becoming one that she refused to allow herself to think of anything else and ultimately succumbed to that fear. I'm not a horror fan, as I've said numerous times, but I do appreciate the more challenging approach to a story like this, because Ray Bradbury, if he were a lesser writer, could have written something about a spirit sneaking into her hotel room and teasing her with nightmares and stuff. But it's written so ambiguously that it could have very easily have been, we'll say, a poltergeist that decided to haunt her, or it could have just been something that she did to herself. I think the caution would still apply in that sense. Whenever I think back on this collection of stories, there are two or three that immediately jump to mind, and this is always one of them. Because it's one of the first that I read, I want to say back in 2019, that just, oof, kicked me right in the stomach. Powerful writing from a man who is a master at it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.